Welcome to a Tricolate tutorial. In this video, we are going to be using a King Grinder K6, which is primarily marketed as an espresso grinder at a relatively accessible price point as compared to other grinders. However, this can do fairly acceptable filter brews, and we are going to try and figure out dialing in using this one. Especially because I have never used this for a Tricolate before, and I think having a good amount of fines is going to actually show us what's going to happen in a Tricolate in most cases. Just a few seconds ago, what you saw was me adjusting the grind setting to go extremely coarse. So this is like 140 clicks from ring lock, for example. And over here, I do an abysmal job of showing you what the grounds look like. They're like extremely coarse, but I do a horrible job of holding my palm at an awkward angle. So sorry about that. I am now going to grind about 20 grams of the coffee we're going to dial in today. This one is a light blend from H&S Coffee Roasters up in Laramie, Wyoming. Coulter from H&S is a person who is extremely dedicated to his craft of coffee roasting and is also super critical of his own work. It's quite amazing to see actually how he kind of has iterated over every coffee, and it's so amazing just to taste every new coffee he comes out with. So if you are into that kind of stuff, do try and purchase from H&S. They're amazing to brew. All right. So now we are kind of gonna brew about 20 grams at a setting of 140 clicks. And while that is pretty coarse, what you are gonna notice is that also generates a relatively good amount of fines despite being that coarse. At this point, I'm actually setting up my travel kettle. This is not a gooseneck kettle, so you're going to see me awkwardly pour from it. I am at an altitude of 8,500 feet when I'm recording this, so the boiling point of water will be about 91 Celsius. I'm going to be using distilled water to brew. If you are thinking why there is no minerals in that water and why am I brewing with distilled water, I'm going to address that towards the end of the video. But long story short, I don't think you need minerality inside of your water to brew a good cup of coffee. I'm not saying that it doesn't have an effect if you like, having minerals versus having no minerals inside of the brew water, but it's just so much easier as a workflow for me, and with the amount of flexibility it gives me to kind of just travel around with either distilled water or use RO water and then add minerals as I go along. So grinding out the whole 20 grams here, after which we're going to prep the brewer, give it a little tap to dislodge any grounds stuck to the burrs. This is a set of filters, I think 78 filters that my friend Long Vo sent me from Vietnam. I think he might have purchased it from AliExpress and he wanted me to test out whether or not I like the porosity of these. Uh, I think they're like relatively low porosity, so nothing too different from other filter cutouts that I've used. What I'm also showing here is if you noticed how the base of the tricolate just like plops out from those three notches where it's supposed to be held, it can get quite inconvenient when you're trying to clean up the brewer after you're done with the whole brewing process. It's a little bit funny and awkward, especially if you go to like dump out grounds inside of a trash can and the whole thing just falls into the trash can. But I digress. What I would recommend instead is buy some food safe silicone glue, put it on those three notches and along the circumference just so it stays there forever planted. I shouldn't say forever because I've done it on this brewer and over time it still comes off, but it's still better than the stock thing that came with it, or the stock setup. I'm here shaking the grounds to homogenize it a little bit. Now, homogenization and shaking grounds doesn't mean you're you are affecting or increasing extraction or improving extraction, it's a way of being consistent from one brew to another. A lot of things that I talk about in this video are going to be about ensuring that things are consistent from one brew to another, right? It's not just about increasing your extraction, it's also about improving it, and improving your consistency while you're at it. The less variance that you have going from one brew to another, the better it's going to be in terms of taste as well, or the tasting experience as well. I'm going to circle back to this while we are brewing with the tricky, because this is going to come, this whole thing comes in handy later on as we progress through the brew. So the water is boiling at this point. I think I'm looking for my WDT tool and I can't find it. Finally found it. I was almost about to just go ahead without it and use like a small spoon to saturate the grounds, which also works, by the way. It's just a little harder to get it level while you're doing it. Um, I'm going to be very, very gentle with the WDT tool. I I think just out of force of habit, I am measuring the weight of the shower screen. There was a phase I had with the Tricolate where I was brewing it very similar to how I brew a V60, where I just dump water onto a spoon. Oh, hey, look, my Get You Some Gear sweatshirt. Um, where I just basically dump water onto a spoon to break the stream and then onto the grounds just so it doesn't agitate as much. But what I found is inside of the Tricolate, just because of its lower width in comparison to like a size 2 V60, it's kind of awkward to do it with a spoon and you still end up with a fair amount of agitation, and it might not be that much of an advantage to the shower screen itself. Now, this is V2 of the shower screen. Uh, Folks who have ended up receiving like a V3 of the Tricolate, the shower screen admittedly is much, much better. That is what I would have expected them to have done with the first iteration of the brewer, like have no agitation at all, break up the stream into droplets. But you'll see while I brew that it just pours like a roofing, like a leaking roof, right? Those streams are just so vigorous that they're going to end up agitating the bed. And if that's the case, you're going to have to live with that, unfortunately, right? And that I think is something we'll have to work with instead of maybe being frustrated about like I was for the longest time till I started grinding coarse. So I'm hoping that this approach helps us regardless of the kind of shower screen that we have. Although those with the newer shower screen will probably end up with lesser agitation of the ground, so you may be able to adjust some of the parameters that I prescribe here. You can see me here kind of zeroing out the refractometer. While the water is getting hot, we are going to measure how much we have extracted at the end just to show you how efficient this brewer and this technique is at extraction, which is also why when you are dialing in, you start out with a set of parameters that are not going to result in very high extraction. So coarser grinds, uh, lower ratio, uh, just so you don't end up with brews that you don't like. So I'm going to pour in maybe 60 to 18 milligrams of water for the blooming process. I always empty out the remnant in the shower screen into the slurry. And in this case, I'm doing it super, super gently, right? Just so I'm limiting the amount of agitation. I'm just looking to saturate the grounds. And I'm going to wait for um, the slurry to just like drain out as much as it can before I do the second pour. In the past, I used to do like 2 minute blooms on the Tricolate. I don't think they're necessary anymore, especially after having used the pulsar for a while. I don't think these kind of brewers need as much blooming unless you're looking for a slightly different taste experience. But personally, just for the kind of clarity that I prefer in brews, I find that even in a Tricolate, it's fine to go with a pretty short bloom. And I'm gonna do the first pour, and you can see right there how the water is not really falling onto the bed in a way that I like as much. There's an amount of agitation that I can't get rid of, so we're gonna live with that. Um, but I'm gonna swirl the brewer here along with a somewhat tall slurry just to ensure that the bed is flat. I'm gonna rock it a little bit just to make sure the grounds fall down in an even manner. Um, some of them get lifted up to the top, which over time they'll come and fall back on the bed itself. And you can already notice how really slow the drawdown is, despite the coarse grind, I have poured to about 200 ml. We are going to be targeting like a 20 to 300, so a total of 200 has been poured in at this point. And you can already see how slow the drawdown is, right? Like I have enough time to put water in the kettle, reheat it, um, you know, do like that whole pose where the guy is disappointed, looking at what's happened with hands on his face, whatever. Um, I'm trying to ensure at this point that the bed is level, right? And this is a good time to talk about the swirl. The reason I like swirling my brews is to get a flat bed, but the reason behind a flat bed is not really to push your extraction high. For me, it's more about having more consistency when I'm going from one brew to the next, right? If there are differences in my brewing process that result in a taste variance, I would not like the way I would not like my coffee bed to be one of those, right? Because that's just going to be so hard to decipher. Why not just have the coffee bed as level as possible when you go from one brew to another? So swirling, holding the bottom of the brewer and giving it just a very gentle spin, like say, a more gentle version than how James Hoffman does it for his V60, I think it's really, really nice. I'm going to do my second pour here all the way up to 300. You may have noticed that I didn't wait for all of the water to draw down, and that is on purpose. I like having a somewhat tall water column when doing a swirl. What that results in is less dislodging of fines, like further dislodgement of fines from the bed itself, besides what you already got from the shower screen. Here I'm just showing how you can sometimes use a WDT tool to level the bed. Uh, if you were not able to achieve that with a swirl, it happens all the time. It's totally fine. Just make sure you're not too aggressive. And again, when you're using that WDT tool, and any technique that you can use to kind of gently flatten the bed is just fine. Just remember though, if you are swirling, and if you do that when the slurry or the water column is really, really short, I have, in my experience, noticed that that tends to increase the amount of clogging. So that's something to keep in mind if you use a swirl to level the bed. At this point, I'm like, I know this brew is going to take maybe another, I don't know, uh, 6, 7 minutes. So I'm going to kind of start putting all of my groceries in the refrigerator. We are on vacation. This is at an Airbnb, so and we are kind of snowed in. So I'm trying to figure out what to make here while I'm snowed in for a couple of days. So pizza came to mind, tacos came to mind. Oh, there we go. Mozzarella slices because we don't have a cheese grater, so I'm just gonna put the slices on the dough. Um, what else are we gonna get out of the grocery bag? Can you see just how long it's taking for it to draw down? So another thing that you're gonna notice with brewers like these, oh, basil, and some butter alternatives. But what you're gonna notice with brewers like these is that say you put a 20-gram dose instead of a size O2 V60, the amount of filter area that you have exposed to the bed overall is so much larger as compared to say something like the Tricolate, that it's actually much easier to choke the Tricolate with the same brewer. I'm sorry, with the same grinder at the same grind setting. Um, and so that kind of might throw people off if they're trying to switch from one brewer to say something like the Tricolate. Mushrooms. Uh, which is why all the more I always recommend whenever you are dialing something in, start out with settings and approaches that will lead to more forgiving brews, right? You want to be able to enjoy coffee when you're dialing in, and not just just not sinking brews of good coffee and be frustrated not being able to figure out the brewer, which happened to me for the longest time when it came to the Tricolate. I was getting muted brew after muted brew after muted brew when I was like, oh, onion, and tortillas and cilantro. That sounds like a nice taco with some additional stuff. Um, So for the longest time, I was very frustrated with the Tricolate because I was trying to follow the recipes that were available, which is like grind really fine, use these long ratios, look at the huge amounts of 45% EY that we're getting from the Tricolate. I think that was the mistake that folks did. I think if folks would have done the opposite, where they kind of reduce the ratio, coarsen the grind, and then live with the long drawdown times, regardless of grinder, they would have had a much more acceptable experience. You are still gonna notice the limits of the brewer, right? Like, oh, some pork for the tacos. Um, you are gonna see that despite the coarsest grind setting, there may still be a lot of clogging, right? For example, this brew probably lasts close to about 10 minutes from the time I pour water, and that's okay. That is a new reality that you can live with for this brewer, and you'll still end up getting some pretty tasty brews. There's other things you may need to sacrifice, right? So say in the past you were doing these 1 to 16, 1 to 17 brews on something like a V60, that may need to be a 1 to 15, right? Say you were grinding at a 500 micron burr gap on a V60, you might have to increase that burr gap to like 800 microns. In this particular context, I'm talking about burr gap from, oh, some sauce for the tacos and some sauce for the pizza. Anyway, in this case, because of the limitations of the brewer, you may have to live with these adjustments, right? That's kind of the compromise you'll have to do. That's not to say that you can't get tasty brews. There are certain things you will have to adapt to be able to get tasty brews out of something like the Tricolate, right? The tasting notes that you get the first time when you use the settings that you're used to are bound to throw you off. That's totally normal. This is a very new style of brewing. And you can kind of see how long it's taking. Oh, yeast for the pizza. Um, but yeah, I think that was it for the groceries. And I apologize for putting you through that nonsense. I think at this point the slurry has almost drained down. I need to find like a spare cup that I can um, just place the brewer on for the rest of it to decant. It takes a painfully long time. Like it, I'm just counting numbers here. But I also want you to notice how flat it's possible to make that bed, right? The first time when you pour the bloom, it may not look that flat. By the time you finish doing those couple of swirls that you pour, um, you'll get pretty flat. One thing I forgot to mention is if you sometimes have a really long or really tall water column, it may be difficult for that swirl to result in a flat bed because it's just is not able to induce motion in those grounds. But this is kind of what the spent bed is going to look like. Um, I need to clean up the station a little bit and need to find myself a cup. We're gonna clean this up. We're gonna kind of measure extraction and we're gonna taste this while we're measuring extraction just to get some idea of what the brew really came out to. So I think the total in this case was 390 something grams. Yeah, you can look if you look at the left of the display on the scale, that brew took a total of about 9 minutes and 40 seconds. This is normal, right? This is like the new reality if you're using something like a Tricolate. Don't be frustrated. Don't be worried. This is normal. It's something you get used to. Oh hey, my umeshi so bad. I'm gonna get like a small spoon out just so I can collect a sample. This is how I usually do my refractometry. I zero out at a certain, I zero out at whatever temperature the distilled water is at, which is close to room temperature, and then I take a small sample, pour it to one cupping spoon. Obviously, these have to be umeshiso spoons, and then take it from one spoon to another. move it around a little bit so it cools down to about the same temperature at which the zero calibration water was sampled. And then I start measuring the TDS, right? So what you're going to notice here is that despite the coarse grind setting, we ended up in like a pretty high TDS range. But the overall extraction, because we restricted the ratio, is going to end up in a fairly reasonable amount for this coffee. Um, this is at 1.65. I'm going to keep pressing here till I get like 3 values in a row. And then meanwhile, in the background, I'm going to find a cup for myself, start tasting the coffee. I'm going to smell it a little bit. I think what I remember from the aroma testing that I did was that I did get some of the notes that I expect from this coffee, but there is just that slight hint of mutedness that had set in. So when you first start dialing in with a tricklet, it's not going to give you the most aromatic brews. Let's also talk about mineralization. Remember I said that I don't put minerals inside of my brew water anymore? In this case, I use distilled water, but I am going to have to add back some minerals just to get like a somewhat balanced taste out of the brew. So this is me adding 1 drop of potassium bicarbonate. I'm specifically using the newer dropper bottles from Lotus. 1 drop of calcium chloride. So that should, for this amount of an output, I think it should bring the GH levels up to maybe around 40 GH and KH levels up to maybe around 20 KH. So with this brew, I'm getting notes of dense, sweet caramel, lots of body, lots of apple pie, but there is that hint of mutedness that I usually end up with whenever I grind a little too fine. This is despite the really coarse grind setting that we used, and this is kind of the new normal when it comes to something like the Tricolate. You have to grind coarser. You have to reduce the ratio. It is so sensitive to settings inside of your brew that anytime anything that results in increased extraction, you're just going to end up with a muted brew. And we really want to try and avoid that, right? So it's okay to have super long drawdown times and grind coarse. It's more important to kind of find an extraction zone that you enjoy before you start pushing extraction. Enjoy it.